Welcome back to the program here, Business Daily, reaching you from Trust TV, and I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. I realized I didn't introduce myself at the beginning of the program, so yes, my name is Chiamaka Nwafor, in case you're joining us for the first time. Now, earlier before we went to that break, I said that we would be talking about the Nigeria's economy in 26 years of democracy. That's 1999 to 2025, actually 26 years of uninterrupted democracy. Now, tomorrow is actually June 12th, where we'll be celebrating the Democracy Day, the new date for the celebration. We've done that for a couple of years now, and we'll look holistically into the conversation more tomorrow. But just before tomorrow comes on board, let's have some sort of a introduction to the course. Now, 26 years is quite a long time, actually, and Nigeria has had 5 democratically elected presidents. And from there, we've seen things like GSM phones, bank consolidation, fintech booms, and also economic crashes, inflation, and heavy debt. Now, I'm just going to go back and just look at it under each president so far. So I'm going to start with President Obasanjo, and that was from 1999 to 2007. I was supposed to have a guest joining me to look into this conversation, but due to 1 or 2 technical issues, he won't be able to join us. So I'm going to have to be having this time with you this morning. Now, democracy returned with President Olusegun Obasanjo in 1999, and his government launched quite massive economic reforms. We see debt relief. That's one of the highlights of the Obasanjo administration from the Paris Club, where we cleared over $18 billion. Now, the telecoms revolution, another thing, you see why people call it the Obasanjo's internet, because that came on board during his era as president of Nigeria. The telecoms revolution began. The first, now this line has changed over time. It's not an advert for them, but they've gone from Econet to one other thing that are currently called Airtel. But then we all first started with the MTN and Econet lines, our first telecoms companies in Nigeria. And then we saw the banking consolidation created stronger, more competitive banks under the CBN governors, Charles Soludo. Now, we can see that information there. We can see that inflation rate, 6.6%, exchange rate, 101 naira 65 kobo to the dollar under President Obasanjo, and the poverty level was at 64.2. Public debt at the time was $28.04 billion, and this was at year 2000, just a year after he came into office. And of course, as you know, just before he left, we were able to take out that debt off the board. We were able to take it off. Now, moving away from that, let's go to the next person who comes on board. Albeit shorter time, we have President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. He was focused on long-term visions like Vision 2020. He launched the Niger Delta Amnesty Program, which brought relative peace and boosted oil production. However, economic reform slowed due to political instability and ill health. Now, under him, this was year 2008. He didn't stay so much, just 2 years in office. We had inflation at 11.6%. Exchange rate, naira to the dollar, was 118 naira 57 kobo. That's about 12 naira and a few kobo up from Obasanjo's time, 8 years after, from 2000. And we see the poverty level was 52.4%. Apparently, it kind of went down on his time. And then public debt again was at $23 billion. That was for Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. Now we go to President Jonathan, 2010 to 2015. Now, when President Goodluck Jonathan came on board, he came up with a bold agricultural transformation agenda, which was led by the outgoing president of the Africa Development Bank, that is Adewumi Adesina, who then was the Minister of Agriculture. Now, the GDP rebasing in 2014, which made Nigeria Africa's largest economy overnight. That happened equally under the Jonathan era, but also the 2012 fuel subsidy protest. that rocked the nation. We saw people putting mattresses on the streets, lying down, protesting the increment of fuel at that time. And we saw a lot of things that happened. A lot of people who are in power today actually kind of came on board, really, due to that protest that took place in 2012. Now, some of the highlights of his time in the presidency when he was there, we could see that the year was 2010 when he came into power, continuing the administration of President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua. Inflation went to 10.8%. Exchange rate was at 155.76. That is to a dollar. And poverty level was at 46%, and public debt was 47%. It seems like the poverty level seems to be decreasing as it goes. However, the public debt seems to be increasing. Wonder why. And we see that the exchange rate too was increasing. So between 2000 and 2011, it was just not so much. Let's see, about give or take 54 naira to a dollar. What was the increment that took place at that time between Obasanjo and President Goodluck Jonathan's time in office? We see there's 155.76 to a dollar. That was just a bit, 11 years, and just about 50-something naira increment took place in that time. Now, the economy saw growth, but job creation and infrastructure really kind of lagged on the time. But there are some things that the president brought on board to help the economy with the P programs. And I know quite a few people who were able to tap into that program, and when some people went into palm oil productions and tried to help their lives and all that. Equally, the amnesty program, not very certain if it was under the Yar'Adua administration or Jonathan administration, that equally tried to help the economy in its own way. Now let's go to the erstwhile president Muhammadu Buhari, 2015 to 2023. The president Muhammadu Buhari's administration battled two recessions in 2016 and in 2020. Now, before we go there, we quickly remember that there was a global recession in 2008, and you saw what that happened with the banking sector. A lot of people had to really, it happened. 2008 global recession, stocks crashed, people died, and that would most likely have happened under the era of President Yar'Adua, and somehow we were able to seemingly stand tall in all of that. But let's come back to Buhari's era. Now, he battled two recessions in 2016 and 2020. His focus was on self-sufficiency through import restrictions, that we had those import bans on rice, really affected the rice, foreign rice, and of course it tried. And I think to a certain extent that helped the economy in Nigeria, because we saw that people now went into rice milling, rice farming, and we had a lot of rice farms and rice companies and rice factories coming on board. I personally believe that helped us as a country, not just economically, and maybe equally health-wise as well, because to a certain extent, the foods we eat are now better, so supposedly healthier. Now, equally, we saw the Anchors Borrowers program. I believe that the Buhari administration was tailored mostly towards the agricultural sector, trying to see that we could do well and do better for ourselves as people, and help the farmers. The Anchors Borrowers program was mostly for the farmers, to help them, enable them be able to farm and produce food only for our nation. And we saw all that things that was done during the president's time on seat. They had the rice pyramids that were built somewhere in some parts of the country, and trying to maybe replicate the granite pyramids of old. But that was what happened. And then we tried to reduce fuel imports through border closures that hurt the trade. However, the naira weakened and debt ballooned. Inflation hit record highs. Now, everybody has their pros and cons, and we see that for President Obasanjo's era, it was the beginning of Nigeria's integration into the global economy. Now, in Yar'Adua's era, the cons would have been that the economic reforms slowed due to political instability and ill health. He wasn't able to stay long enough to see that these things that he implemented or wanted implemented could come to materialization and come to fruition. And then, of course, in Jonathan's era, we see that though the economy saw growth, there was a job creation lag and infrastructure lag. Now we come to President Muhammadu Buhari's era, and we see that the Naira weakened and the debt ballooned. Let's go and look at that information about President Buhari, talking about what happened in his time as presidency. We can see that the year was 2015 when he came into power, and inflation was at 9%. Exchange rate went up to 197.5, rather 50 kobo to a dollar. That's about give or take from that information is changing as we go. So we see that year 2016 now, inflation was 15%. So we'll take that again. Year 2015, when he came into power, inflation was 9%, exchange rate was 197.5%, poverty level was 62.6%. Now, in his time, poverty level went up, public debt went up as well at the time when he came into power in 2015. Now, the next year being 2016, let's see what happens for President Buhari. Okay, so while we're waiting for that information to come, we can see the exchange rate went up at the time when he came into power to 197.5%. That's about, give or take, 155. So that is 143 naira more added at the time when President Buhari came into power. But at 2016, just the year after, we see there's been some hike. Inflation, 15.7%. Exchange rate, 305 naira to a dollar. That's close to close to half of the exact amount, when double the amount that was there in 2015 to 305 naira to a dollar. Then poverty level is at 65, went up about 2% to 65%, and public debt came down to $57.4 billion in year 2016. Now we are in the era of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. That era started in 2023, 2025, and the year is 2023. Inflation was 24.6%. It's up. Exchange rate at the time he came in was 461 naira to the dollar. The exchange rate keeps increasing, and it seems like it keeps jumping by 100 naira or more as the year goes by. But we'll see what happens in 2025 in this time. And poverty level was at 70. Let's go back to 2023, please. And poverty level was there, and public debt. Now, we're in 2024. Apparently, we're moving fast due to time, and inflation is now 33.7%. Exchange rate is 1,400, and poverty level 74, public debt 126, and is seemingly still climbing. That's what's happening right now in this era. We've seen quite a lot of changes, but now under him, all of the economic reforms would be that the fuel subsidy has been removed, and some of these things are pointed out are an outcome, a consequence of the fuel subsidy removal. The naira floated, that is why the dollar is at that amount, and promises of fiscal discipline and investment incentives. I'm going to just take you just briefly run through across some numbers. They wouldn't show on your screen at the moment, but maybe tomorrow you have that. Naira versus dollar at 1999 was 92 naira to a dollar in 1999, and right now it's over $1,400 in 2025. The GDP growth averaged between 6% between 2023 and 2024, but it has slowed since. That's what's happened on a good term. Inflation averaged between 12 to 20% in recent years, and unemployment, youth unemployment, reached over 40% at its peak. And debt from 3.5 billion in 2006 post-debt relief to over $110 billion in 2025. This is just a mix of what's happened between 1999 and 2025. We have to go. Time won't permit us to go further in the conversation. But in case you want to know more and have more information on what's happened in the last 26 years in Nigerian economy, join us tomorrow on the program for more in-depth conversation. For more of our programs, news, and documentaries, don't forget to follow us on our YouTube Live and on our social media platforms. I am Chiamaka Nwafor. Same time, same place tomorrow. Bye for now.